One. Welcome to week 2 of the series called No Worries. Just before we begin, we're all good?
Yes.
Just before we begin, just a couple of announcements. First of all, as was on the screen before, in a couple of weeks, Friday night, the 28th of February, we're doing what we call a mindful minyan here at 6:15. In fact, mindfulness is something which we're going to revisit a bit in this course as well, because it does tie into the whole concept of controlling our thoughts and being focused and so on. So in a few weeks, today we'll mention it, but also come back to it in a few weeks. But this is a service, Friday night service, where we bring in mindfulness and meditation and so on. So that's Friday night, the 28th of February. Also the 5th of March, just if you want to diarize it, the 5th of March, I'm starting a 3-week series on a Thursday night, 3 Thursday nights, Kabbalah meditation. It's called, we're going to connect it a bit to what we're doing now, but positive living in 3 parts, as you can see the 3 topics there, for men and women, from 8 to 9:15, so that's starting the 5th of March. Also, I didn't manage to put it on the slides, but last night we had a really nice presentation on Ir David of Jerusalem. In 2 weeks' time, on the 26th of February, Wednesday night, I'm doing a talk here for men and women together with Mrs. Tamar Krebs on the topic of dementia, exploring dementia from a Jewish and practical perspective. So it should be very interesting. So that's in 2 weeks' time, Wednesday night, 26th of February, 8:15 to 9:15. Okay, so last week, come in. That's okay. Last week we began the discussion on positive thinking. We talked about worry, and we talked about that we would deal with the concept of worrying, anxiety, negative thinking, and so on. We explained that we all have a little bit of it. We talked about worry and anxiety with a small w and a small a. Some have it more than others, and the question was how we deal with all of it. And of course, we're going to go slowly through the topics and through the ideas over the weeks. But just to review, last week we gave a bit of a general introduction. I just wanted to just go through it very quickly, just to refresh our memory. So, first of all, we talked about clinical anxiety, where one needs much more professional intervention, and the difference between that and the regular anxiety that we're talking about, the regular worry that we're talking about, which is something we can do something about. The concepts that we'll discuss is always good for any level of anxiety or any level of negative thinking, but sometimes it needs much more of an intervention as well. I just always mention that because it's such an important thing. I don't want people to think that these discussions will replace the need for proper professional intervention when it becomes necessary. We talked about the three garments of human expression, which is thought, speech, and action. Speech and action are things which are external, where we relate to someone outside of us, much easier to actually control, because it's something that's not constant, but we can control it. But the thought is very different. Thought, we said, was similar to the turtle, that it's a garment, but that's a Kabbalistic idea. It's a garment, but it's a garment that is part of who we are. And it's constant. We always think, and we're going to come back to this today a little bit, we always think, and therefore it's much harder to turn off, much harder to control, but yet the foundational principle we talked about last week is that although it's much more complicated, much more difficult, but the foundational principle is that it's possible. It's possible because we have this idea that moach shalit al halev, the brain controls the heart, and we can reach a stage where the brain could control the heart, but we explain what that means is it's different to controlling speech and action. Speech and action we can control that we don't engage in it to begin with, whereas when it comes to thought it's a little bit different, because when it comes to thought we actually cannot control the initial thought. Initial thoughts that come into our head we actually can't control, but we could control what we called last week the ruminating principle. So we can control thoughts from ruminating and staying there and living there and being negative and destructive and standing in the way of our progress and our growth. And we brought in a TED Talk discussion by Guy Winch, where we talked about the damage of taking work stress home with you and ruminating on it, particularly when you're stressing about something which isn't even in the time where it's applicable and relevant, and then it's the most destructive. And we discussed a little bit. We brought that as an example of the whole concept of ruminating. Okay. So, over the next few weeks, we are going to talk about different strategies and different ideas. And we're going to get, of course, to the specific subject of the topic, which is worrying, negative thinking, stress, anxiety, and so on. But before we do that, we need to build a bit of a picture, right? We need to build a bit of a picture and understand, number one, what are our thoughts? How does it actually work, right? Because if we're going to talk about controlling the way we think and negative thinking, we need to understand how we think and the effects of thinking. We need to understand how thought interacts with the rest of our personality and how it all works. So today what I'm going to do is the following. Here's the program for today. So I'm going to share with you some ideas that come from the first chapter in the book by Sarah Edelman, who I mentioned last week, but not the book I mentioned last week. That was called No Worries. It's this book, which is Change Your Thinking, a very, very good book. I'm going to share some ideas and relate it and connect it to some concepts we find in Jewish literature and Jewish thinking. But before I do that, I want to share with you an insight that comes from one of the essays of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he explains a cryptic passage, a very, very cryptic passage in the Talmud, which relates and it sheds light on the whole essence of what the human being is and will create a really, really good foundation for what we're going to discuss. I'm bringing it in particularly because this week was Tu B'Shvat. And Tu B'Shvat, we know, is the Rosh Hashanah of trees. It's the New Year of trees. We talk about trees, we talk about fruit, we talk about growth. And it's a Talmud that talks about the concept of the human being being compared to the tree. It's a very strange passage in the Talmud. And I'm going to share with you a perspective to try and understand it. So, in the Talmud, in the tractate called Ta'anit, the Talmud follows. That didn't come out so well. Sorry, I try to improve my design skills, which aren't very good, and doesn't always work. So you have to forgive me. It's not one of my greatest strengths. One day we have a lot of money, I'll employ someone to, especially take care of that side of things. Anyway, so Rabbi Yochanan, who was one of the great sages of the Talmud, he said the following, and he asked a question. There's a verse in the Torah which says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. Man, the human being, is like a tree, right? A tree of the field. So Rabbi Yochanan said as follows, he said, what is the meaning of that which is written? For a man is the tree of the field. And is man actually a tree of the field? Now that question is very strange, actually. I mean, obviously anyone reading the verse which states that the man is a tree of the field will understand that it's allegoric, that it's meant figuratively speaking, right? No one in their right mind ever thought a person is a tree. A person is a person, a tree is a tree. But obviously the Torah, for whatever reason, was comparing a person to a tree. Yet, Rabbi Yochanan posed the question and he says, it's a very strange verse. Is a person really like a tree? So we need to understand what that question was, first of all. And then the answer is even more strange. And the answer is as follows. That's better. The answer is, he says, rather, it is because it is written earlier in the same verse, you may eat them, but you may not cut them down. And then it's written about the next verse that you may destroy them and cut them down. Now what he's referring to is, just so you understand the context, the Torah talks about two different trees, and it talks about Jews going into war and the laws of warfare, which the Torah does dedicate quite a significant section to. And essentially there's about coming to a city, and there's trees there, you can wage war and you can protect yourself and defend yourself, but leave the trees alone. And particularly the Torah makes reference to a fruit tree. And it makes a distinction between a tree that bears fruit and a tree that doesn't bear fruit. And with a tree that bears fruit, there's a concept where you're not allowed to cut it down at all. A tree that doesn't bear fruit, sometimes there's circumstances where it's okay to cut them down. Okay? Now, so he brings these two things and he says, this indicates that there are certain trees that may be cut down while others may not be destroyed. How so? So now he relates it back to the human being. He says, if a Torah scholar, Torah teacher, great scholar, great person, is worthy, you may eat them, but you may not cut them down. But if he's not worthy, you may destroy and cut down. That's the answer to the question. Now again, these are, I think I shared this with you before. Sometimes the Talmud shares with us philosophical concepts, and the way of the Talmud doing it is very cryptic. And it talks often in code language, and it's up to the commentaries that come later, the great commentators, to actually decode and to understand what the Talmud is talking about. So this is a very cryptic. First of all, the question is problematic and the answer is problematic. So let's just summarize. The question is a person like a tree? Obviously not. So what was the question? Secondly, if there's a question, what's the answer? So the answer is essentially saying yes, a person is like a tree. There's two types of trees. A tree, it looks like in the Gourarie and the Talmud here, is referring to a scholar, a teacher. And since the Torah makes a distinction between two types of trees, the ones who bear fruit, the ones who don't bear fruit, the Talmud says, what are those two types of trees if we translate them into a tree being a symbol of a leader or a scholar or a teacher? The difference is a teacher or a scholar who is worthy versus a teacher and a scholar who's not worthy. The one you should eat the fruit from, preserve it, protect it. The other one, don't worry about it. Keep away from it. Or you can even dismiss them. What does that all mean? What is the Talmud trying to teach us? So let me share with you an idea. It goes like this. And this again is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe's teachings, and he explains a very, very beautiful idea, and it gives us an insight to what the real mission of a human being is and how it all works. And you'll see how it relates to the discussion that we're having in a minute. So we know, and we've started this before, that the world, as the Talmud tells us, is divided into four parts. The four parts are, firstly, the domem. The domem is the inanimate object, like the rocks, the minerals, the mountains, things that don't have a visible life, visible vibrancy. Tzomeach, things that grow, vegetation, fruit trees, generally things that grow. The third one is Chai, the animal kingdom. And the fourth one is Medaber, the human being, known as the communicator. Now, in Kabbalah, they teach the following idea, that a human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm. In other words, a human being is a reflection, the human being encapsulates the entire creation. So just like the world is divided into four components, the human being also has within him or herself reflected these same four ideas. How so? So I don't want to spend too much time going into the discussion in its own right, but let me just share with you enough so we can use this as to explain this cryptic piece of the Talmud. So the inanimate part of the human being, we are taught in Kabbalah, is words, because we've explained words actually are nothing. Words are only as good as the content you put into them. So the ability to speak words, I didn't say the ability to communicate, that's something else. The ability to just speak words, like a baby when they grow up and they start babbling and say things that don't make any sense, those words are called that's the inanimate part of the person, right? The inanimate part of the person, meaning our words. Words don't have really any life to them. They don't have any purpose on their own, in their own right, unless you put into them emotion or cognition or content and so on. So words are considered the inanimate part of the human being. Tzomeach, the things that grow, the trees. What's the tree within us? According to this explanation of Kabbalah, the tree is our emotions, our feelings. Feelings are very passionate. Feelings are very strong. Feelings often grow, like trees do. They get stronger and stronger. If they're negative emotions, that's a problem, because if we don't deal with them, they get stronger and stronger in a negative way. Positive emotions get stronger and stronger in a positive way, and so on. They're also very hard to move. They're very hard to move. That's why a tree doesn't wander around. A tree stays in one place. Once a person is entrenched in a certain type of emotional personality, normally, unless they work very, very hard, they get stuck there. Right? They're hard to move. So therefore, the tree within the human being symbolize and represent the emotional part of our human makeup. Yeah? The next one, Chai. Chai, which is the animal kingdom. Interestingly enough, the animal kingdom within the human being represents intellect. What's the connection between animals and intellect? The connection is that animals are not like trees. Animals wander from place to place, like our intellect. In other words, the power and the weakness of thinking is the ability to have a perspective one day and next day to change perspective completely. To see things from different ways, from different perspectives, from different angles. Right? Seichel, intellect, cognition is not fixed. Cognition can wander. You can look at something one way, you can look at something one, which is a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing, the strongest thing is because why? It's the tool of decision making. The power to make decisions, the power for human beings to make decisions between wrong and right, to choose one thing over another, is to look at something differently and to make a decision according to what we objectively see to be the truth. If we're not sure, we can try to look at it at different angles. We can hear opinions from other people, different to emotion. We've talked about this in the past, why it is like that, but that's what cognition, how cognition works. And therefore cognition is considered the animal part of the human being because animals move from place to place, different to the human being. And what's the human being within the human being? In other words, what's the essence of the person within the person? That's the ability to communicate. Now, I just should explain, the ability to communicate is very different than the ability to speak words. In other words, we communicate with words, although we communicate other ways too, right? But the communication ability, as opposed to just speaking words, communication is really the essence of the human being. We've talked about this at length before, but communication is this concept of the ability to connect to someone else, to go beyond my finite self and to go into the world of someone else, to listen to someone else, to connect to someone else, to build relationships, to build human relationships. That's the essence of what the human being is, and that's why the ability of communication, which is really the source of words, not the words themselves, is the essence of the human being within the human being. And that's why in Bereshit, we've said this before, in Genesis, where it talks about the soul of the human being, when God created the human being, it says He blew into him a nishmat chayim, a soul of life. Vayihi adam lenefesh chaya, and the person became a living being. And the Aramaic Targum, the great Aramaic Targum says, what does it mean? A person became a communicator. In other words, we became human. To be human means to really connect to someone else, to talk to someone else, to connect to the world of another person. Okay. So what does this mean? This is a brief description of this. What does this all mean? That comes out from what we've been talking about is that the tree within the human being is our emotions, right? Now we can understand, we can go back, we can understand the question of the Talmud. It says in the Pasuk, it says in the verse, for a man is a tree. So Rabbi Yochanan asked the question, is the man really the tree? In other words, is that really the human being? The emotions? Does that define the human being? Animals have emotions. If you want to define the human being, are you going to pick the tree within the human being? That was the question. Surely you should highlight the greatness or the uniqueness of the human being, which is to be able to think, to be able to be intellectual, to be able to make decisions, things that animals can't do. The ability to communicate, which is uniquely special for the human being. Why does the Torah say that the human being is like a tree? Why do we compare the human being to a tree if a tree is one of the four components of the human being and the part we're referring to is the emotions, the midot, the emotional feelings, the emotional responses of the human being? Why do we say that the Adam is a sadeh, that the human being is a tree? Why is that the defining aspect of the human being? And the Talmud says, yes, it is. Why? You see, out of those four components, where does the personality of the person live? Where do you see the personality of a human being? In the emotions, in the emotional responses. Where is a person expressed? In emotion. Not the way they think. You would never tell. A person can give a lecture, a person can give a very, very intellectual, deep, an amazing talk. They can teach you amazing intellectual concepts. They can teach you from one perspective the one day, from a different perspective the next day, and you have no idea, unless you know the person closely, what their personality is. I mean, you can tell a little bit because you interact with the person, but if you read a book, let's say, so you didn't see the person talking. If you see the person talking, you get a little bit of the personality too, but if you read a book, you have no idea what the personality of the person is. Right? When you see a person respond to outside stimulus, when you see a person react to another person, react to something that's gone on behind them, to react to the weather, react to anything, you'll see, is it a positive person, a negative person, a kind person, a cruel person, a calm person or an anxious person, you'll see the personality of the human being. Because we are taught in Kabbalah that the emotional part of the human being has a very deep root within the soul, because the personality of the person is in the emotion. That's where it lives. That's where you tell what a person is going to be like. The Gemara says, even with regard to children, there's a very, I don't know exactly how it works, but there's a saying, just like every language has sayings. There's sayings in the Talmud which come from Aramaic, and there's a saying in the Talmud, butzin bekat v'yedia, that you can tell from the way pumpkins grow very small what kind of pumpkin it's going to grow into. Meaning, if you look at children, you can't tell their intellectual skills very early on, that takes time. But you can discover the personality. When I mean the personality, I mean the default personality. Not the one that we want to mold maybe, but the default personality of a child from very young on. Why? Because the personality of a person is the tree. It's the midot, it's the emotion. Therefore, says the Talmud, this is what you need to know. That at the end of the day, what is our mission? What is the hardest thing to do in life? But what is the most important thing to do in life? Is to work on our emotion. To work on our responses. To work on our personality. If we want to change as human beings, not by becoming cleverer. We need to learn, we need to study, it's essential. But where are we going to succeed in becoming a better person? How is our behavior going to become better? How is our whole world look and our whole interaction with other people and our relationships and even the ability to communicate, which is uniquely human? How's that going to be effective and how's that going to be successful? We've got to work on the tree. It's got to be a good tree. It's got to be a healthy tree. And if we have patches of the tree which aren't good, if we have patches of our tree which is rough, we have patches of personalities that are problematic and weak, we have to work on it. We have to believe we can change it. Right? The problem is that it's the most difficult thing of the person to change. If you tell me I've got to do something tomorrow I didn't do today, I can choose to do it. If you tell me I've got to try and learn and understand something that I thought was difficult to understand, I can work in it. If you ask me to please try and look at something from a different perspective, I can do it if I choose to. It's relatively easy. What the most difficult thing to do is to change the tree, to change the emotion. Because that's changing us. Right? So therefore, says the Talmud like this. You asked the question, you said, do you define the human being by the emotion? The answer is yes, we do. And that's why, says the Talmud, that the Torah says that when it comes to trees, there are two types of trees, good trees, not such good trees. And therefore, says the Talmud, that when you go to learn, and the Talmud is talking in the context of studying from someone, receiving from someone, being influenced or inspired by someone, don't look at what you think the human being is. Don't say that person's an unbelievable teacher because they're so smart and they're so unbelievable and they can talk so well and they can teach you concepts which are amazing. Because if you go and you create a mentor for yourself, you need to understand the purpose of that mentor is to change you, to inspire you, to influence you, to uplift you. And therefore you want to know if it's a good teacher, you want to know if it's a fruit-bearing tree or not a fruit-bearing tree, if you should preserve it and learn from it and teach and connect to it or leave it away. Don't look at the knowledge, look at the tree. Is it a good person? Has this person been able to take their cognition? Has this person been able to take what they understand and to process cognitively and make it influence their personality? Have they refined their personality? Have they changed as a person? Are they a good person? Is it a person that grows, but grows not just grows in their knowledge, but grows as a tree? In other words, grows as a human being, grows as a better human being, a better personality? That's a person you should receive from. That's a person you should connect to. That's a person you should absorb from and learn from. Because, yes, ha'adam eitz hasadeh. At the end of the day, you want to know who the person is? The person is the tree. Now, why did I bring this all in? Is that clear? Sorry? Is that good? Yeah? Okay. Because we actually are not talking about emotion. But I wanted to bring that in because, well, we are talking about emotion, but we're not going to focus on changing emotions because the goal of life is to work on our emotions. But you do it by working on everything else. That's how it works. What I mean with that? Because emotions are impossible to change. Unless we work on every other part of who we are. One of them is thoughts. And we're going to develop it a bit today, a little bit, right? In other words, what will change our emotions? What will change us? The way we think, as we said last week. But why is that so important to understand? Because the goal is not to change our thoughts. That's the process. That's the means to the end. The goal is to change the tree. The goal is to change who we are. The goal is to change our personality. The goal is not to be so stressed. The goal is to have positive thinking, meaning positive emotions, really. The goal is to respond properly. The goal is to have effective relationships. The goal is to be calmer, to be kinder, to be more tolerant, to be able to respond with the right emotion at the right time. That's the goal. That's who the human being is. That's how we grow. That's how we become a better human being. The goal is to have emotions and have feelings that will guide, as we'll talk soon, and activate and inspire good behavior, which come from good emotions. Right? If you're in the street and someone cuts you off, if your emotions are good, you'll be kind to the person. Your behavior will be different. If your emotions aren't good, you'll respond badly and your behavior will be negative. All comes from how we feel, how we respond to the world around us. So the goal is changing the emotions, but the way we do it is looking at our thinking. The way we do it is looking at our behavior. The way we do it is to look at every single part of our personality, every single part of the human makeup, and to ensure that they are working in such a way which will change the emotion. Right? So when we talk about positive thinking, we talk about having positive thoughts and thinking and positive beliefs and positive values. We're not talking about having them just for themselves. We're talking about having them in such a way where they will influence the tree. They will influence the emotion, because so often people have good thinking, and yet it doesn't have any influence on the way they are. It doesn't change them at all. It doesn't change the tree. It doesn't affect their personality. It doesn't make them better people. It just makes them academics. That's good, but that's not the mission of the human being. Believe it or not, we weren't sent to this planet to be academics. Not that academia is a bad thing, but don't forget, I promote learning. Otherwise I'd be out of a job, right? So, learning is critical. But what the Talmud is trying to say is, the learning is critical, but it's only good learning if it leads to something. The learning is only good if it leads to the change of emotion. And there's a huge difference between learning and thinking, which changes emotion, and learning and thinking that doesn't change emotion. The learning is different. And that's what we have to examine. We have to examine how our thinking, we're going to focus on thinking and a bit of behavior also, but we have to understand that the goal is not the thinking, the goal is the way we feel. Feeling, emotions by definition, is the way we respond to the outside world, things outside of us. But if we want to change the emotional process, we have to look at our thinking and see how we're going to make sure that the thinking has an effect on the emotion. Is that okay? So, how do our thoughts work? So, what I want to do, as I said, I want to just take some concepts from the first chapter of that book, and share them with you and talk about them a little bit. So, Sarah Edelman, in the first in chapter 1 of that book, Changing Your Thinking, she gives a very, very good and great summary of the famous form of therapy known as CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which developed in the let me just get the right place there. Developed in the 1950s. And she explains a number of concepts which are very, very much in line, as is a lot of more modern positive psychology, in line with Jewish thinking. And I want to share some of this with you because it will create a very, very good foundation for how we explore these concepts in the next few weeks, and how we explore the whole idea of the head ruling the heart. So a bit of history. This is actually good history, just a bit of context. So, and I know there's some psychologists in the room, so if I say anything wrong, let me know. I'll just blame it on the author. In the first half of the 20th century, so we know that Freud's theories was the dominating theories in psychology and Western psychiatry. Now, I mentioned that only because it's important to understand how it works. So Freud was very, very much in the belief that all psychological problems come from repressed, unconscious longings from early childhood, right? So somehow we got messed up when we were a child, and that's now responsible for all the problems that we have. Which is great, because we can blame everything on our parents. Which is why from that he he developed this whole process of psychoanalysis, which is very time-consuming, involved a lot of daily sessions for many, many years sometimes, basically delving and exploring and getting to the bottom of the client's and the patient's subconscious mind, right, unconscious mind, which would get some insight into their source of unhappiness and so on and so forth. In 1950, there were some therapists and psychologists who were actually students of Freud originally, but rejected a lot of his thinking and went into different approaches for various reasons, either because they thought it would be much more practical, much more effective, and in some cases much more positive, right? And two of them were Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck, and they really become the foundational therapists, of psychologists, which are behind the whole CBT thing. Now, I'm not giving you a history in psychology, I'm just trying to create a context so I can share with you the ideas, right? So in early 1960, Albert Ellis said the following. What he did was, he said he wants to start focusing on the thoughts and the belief. Now remember those two words, because we'll come back to them. Thoughts and beliefs, because they're actually different, that create the psychological distress of a human being, right? And he said the following. This is the way he put it. He said, I'm going to read you these few lines because it's very well put. He said he argued that individuals that upset themselves by thinking irrationally and that psychological problems can be resolved by teaching people to think in a more rational, balanced way, right? And therefore he went on to develop and encourage patients to focus on what was happening and challenge some of their thoughts and the underlying beliefs that were contributing to the distress, right? Aaron Beck then afterwards expanded this a lot more, and he developed sort of the CBT, he focused a lot on depression and so on, and he talked about core beliefs, which he called schemas, which were developed either in early childhood or because of circumstances, or because of traumas, or because of personality, whatever the case was. And whereas Ellis used the word irrational, he sort of changed the terminology of it. Not all our thinking is irrational. Sometimes we have negative thinking, it's actually quite rational. And sometimes there's good cause for negative thinking. But he used words like negative, maladaptive, unhelpful, unrealistic, faulty, self-defeating, and so on and so forth. Now, this was considered an amazing breakthrough and still used. There are other forms of therapy that have come from that as well, which we'll talk about maybe in the coming weeks. But I quoted once to you an article from Rabbi Sachs, who, like we often do here, we talk about how many of these concepts are really, really strongly rooted in Jewish thinking and in Torah sources and so on and so forth. So Rabbi Sachs, in one of his articles where he talks about this, points out that a lot of the underlying theories, right, of modern psychology, or more positive psychology, Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology, or a lot of the work that is done on happiness and gratitude, logotherapy of Viktor Frankl, even the seven habits from Stephen Covey, and so on, they all essentially go back to one point. And it's a point which has been around long before these discoveries. It's a point which is a fundamental concept in Jewish thinking, the thought which we've often talked about, and we talked about it last week as well, the idea of moach shalit al halev, that God gave us this ability that the brain can rule the heart, that the way we think will change the way we feel. Again, as I said before, the way we feel at the end of the day is most important, but the way we change that is using that unique tool, that unique human tool that God gave us, which is the ability to think, the ability to process cognition, the ability to make decisions, the ability to understand objectively the difference between wrong and right, the ability to detach ourselves from being emotionally involved in something and take a step back, or what Stephen Covey calls the pause, and to say, let me not respond, let me put my emotions on hold, let me think this through so I can understand the different perspectives, I can understand not what I want, but I can understand what the truth is. Very different, right? There's a big difference between what I want, which is emotional, because don't forget, as we've talked about many times, emotions are me, and emotions are how I respond to the outside world. Intellect is how I take concepts from the outside world and internalize them, how I bring them into being. Very different, right? Which is why that emotions are responses that I have to the outside world, which is me. And it's often what I want, and it's often mixed in with my ego, which is part of who I am. And therefore might not be the right thing, it might just be what I want at the moment, either to vent or to achieve transient pleasure or transient calmness, not thinking long term, not thinking morally, and so on and so forth. So God gave us this amazing tool to take a step back, to think things through, to understand concepts from outside, not from us, but objective concepts of what is the difference between wrong and right, and then to internalize them to such a way where we can then steer and guide and change and transform sometimes the emotional responses which we're going to have, and engage in much more positive emotional experiences and much more effective and productive responses. So that's the idea of Moach Shalet al Halev, which became, in modern times, really the foundation of all of these different theories, all these different therapies, all these different approaches. That is something that really was very, very much part. It's spoken about in great detail, as Rabbi Sachs points out in that article, in the book of the Tanya, written by the first Chabad Rebbe, but it's in many, many places, because there his whole magnum opus is based on this concept. But it's really spoken about in the Talmud, it's spoken about much earlier, and it's a very, very fundamental principle in Jewish thinking. Now, using that concept, right, the process of CBT, the process of this approach, is really a number of components. So first of all, it's cognitive strategies. In other words, it's about challenging our thinking, which is really the core of what we're going to talk about. It's about understanding what we are thinking, which is also an important thing. It's understanding what we are thinking and how to challenge it. So it's two steps really. It's becoming aware. We're going to talk about this next week in great detail. It's being aware of what we are actually thinking, and then learning how to challenge it, right? But it also has a very, very important behavioral component. That's why it's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because as we'll see, our mind changes the heart, but so does our behavior. And therefore sometimes learning to engage in positive behavior also becomes very helpful. And as she puts it, one component that is becoming very popular now, and also part of the whole CBT therapy in many cases, is mindfulness strategies. That's why I said in the beginning, we're going to come back to mindfulness a little bit in the series, because it is a very, very important component, and it actually has come back into the whole sort of more sort of practical and approaches of therapy of CBT. They've incorporated mindfulness because it's so powerful, and it's been used very clinically now to learn how to focus, learn how to calm down, learn how to be in the moment, and so on and so forth, which becomes part of the whole equation. Now, let's just talk about some of these ideas. So when we talk about thinking, okay, as she points out, this is a very, very important thing. It's very important to make a distinction between thoughts and beliefs. Now, she doesn't say this in a book, but I want to just go back to something I said last week. I talked about the three garments of expression, right? Three garments of expression is the ability to speak, to think, to speak, and to do. Now, when I say three garments of expression, thoughts is one of them. It's a means of expression which God gave us, as He did speech, as He did the ability to do things. But it's to express what we are. In other words, thoughts are not our intellect, right? Thoughts is just where we think about our intellect. And we think about what we believe in. We think about what we feel. We think about what we're going to do, right? That's why we need to make that distinction. Why do I say this? Because thoughts is a tool that we have. It's a means of expression, but it's always working. Whether we're thinking, whether we're not thinking, whether we're studying, we're not studying, we're always thinking something. In fact, apparently, I didn't know this, but it's been estimated that the average person has between 4,000 and 7,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot of thoughts, right? I think. Right? And most of the time, which is a very big problem nowadays, particularly, most of the time we're not even aware of what we're thinking, right? That's the rule. We're always thinking. But most of the time we don't even know that we're thinking. We're not even aware of what we're thinking. And I just want to tell you, what are you thinking about? No clue. Not only because it's a secret, because you really have no clue. It's just mind wanders, which is where mindfulness comes into it a little bit as well, because we're so on a treadmill today, we're so running from one thing to another, that really we actually have no idea sometimes what we're thinking, right? However, sometimes we do know what we're thinking. But what's important to understand is that we have beliefs which inspire thinking. Okay? And that's very different. So what we believe in inspires what we think. Now, we don't have 7,000 beliefs a day. I hope not, because that's a problematic person. We have a few beliefs, right, that are constant. They're sometimes conscious, sometimes not conscious. Sometimes we're consciously thinking of our value system, of our belief system, sometimes not. Whether we are consciously thinking of them or not, they're there, they're part of who we are. We can change our beliefs. and that's good, and that's what we should do. In fact, a lot of what we're going to talk about is challenging our beliefs, right? But whatever they are, the beliefs inspire what we think, right? So, as she gives an example, and I say she gives an example because it's not mine, because don't blame me for always giving a car example, but, right, a driving example, but she gives it. I guess that's a good example to give. So she says, Bob narrowly avoids a car accident when another motorist fails to give way to him. As he gestures angrily to the other driver, Bob thinks to himself, what a stupid idiot. Yeah. Don't put your hand up if it happened to you this. Right? But we have thoughts like that sometimes, right? You're in front of you, behind a car, and they're just not moving. You think, what a nut! He doesn't see the green light, right? So those are thoughts. But where do the thoughts come from? The thoughts come from, and the thoughts then, what happens to the thoughts is they then result in responses. The responses are divided into two. The responses is emotion. So we get angry, we agitate, we stress, and then we do something stupid, normally, as a result of those emotions, right? Say something stupid, do something stupid, whatever the case is. Now, his thoughts, when he thinks to himself, what a stupid idiot, that's very easy to identify. In other words, if you say, what were you thinking? On the spot, I was thinking that he's stupid. Correct? That's not a belief, that's a thought. Now, what do you believe in that made you think that? Right? So what do you think? What belief made the person think such a thing? Sorry?
Efficiency is better than being...
Okay, or everyone should always be efficient, right? Or everyone should always do the right thing. Everyone should always drive and always see without, of course, except for me, but everyone should always drive, right? And always see where they're going and always watch what they're doing. And he didn't say that, right? But I might not be thinking that whole Megillah when I'm saying stupid idiot. I'm just thinking it. Because the thought is there, but the thought comes from a belief, right? So when we talk about challenging our thinking, it's controlling our thinking. But actually, we're not challenging our thinking. We have to really challenge our belief system. Belief system. We have to challenge what we believe in. Right? You follow? And if we challenge what we believe, if he would believe that people are human beings, everyone makes mistakes, not everything's intentional, if that was part of his regular thinking system, then he wouldn't think he's a stupid idiot. Because the thinking pattern would just, and then he wouldn't have the emotion of being agitated and stressed, and he'd be more tolerant, and then he wouldn't do silly things, correct? Yeah.
Isn't also just about changing unhelpful thoughts? Because that thought was unhelpful. So she changed that thought from an unhelpful thought to a thought to...
Yes, you can, but the thing is, why do you have the thought? Why did you land up with that thought to begin with? Right? You have to, I mean, we're going to go into this a lot in the next few weeks, but just to give you a taste, right? Because the thought is not just a thought in isolation, the thought comes from a belief.
But where does the belief come from?
It's automatic.
Okay. Belief comes from a value system. Yeah.
Rabbi, you once told us feelings aren't facts.
Aren't?
Facts.
And therefore?
That's what you told us.
That's true.
So that's true. So
Yeah.
that person isn't necessarily a stupid idiot who didn't go straight away on the red light.
Yeah, but the question is, why did I think it was a stupid idiot?
Because you've got an automatic belief.
Yeah, because I have a belief which is incorrect, correct? No, my belief is not true. I got that, right? But I have to become aware of what I'm believing so I can challenge it. Follow? This is not easy, by the way.
Having a thought is normal, whether it's from our belief system or whatever. It's how we channel it and how we respond, as you just said.
Having
so
the
if you hadn't have
yeah.
verbalized you're an idiot and thought it, then
Well, no, but even think, it depends at what level. No, you wouldn't have thought he's an idiot. If you had more, if you had a belief in people who make mistakes, human beings, they didn't mean to cut me off, I wouldn't think that. Anyway, I mean, stay tuned, because it'll develop. Yeah, let's say one more question, then we'll move on, yeah.
Like in that example, that could be just a response to how you've grown up. If you have a parent.
Why we have...
So is that...
Yes, why we have beliefs, we'll talk about in a second. Okay? Where the origin of beliefs, holiday, we'll talk about that. Yeah, beliefs have origins, I get that. Right? Now, so we have a belief. Let's just work this through. So we have a belief. The belief expresses itself in a thought. A thought is much more conscious. The belief might be in the background, but thinking brings it to the consciousness. Because at that point you actually do know what you're thinking about, right? Because you're getting upset. The more you think it, the more agitated you get, the more stressed you get. Bad emotion then brings bad behavior. So we know that the way the human being often works is a concept we once talked about. Well, we talked about it in the positive way. This is the negative way. That a human being is supposed to be a melech on themselves, a king. King stands for the word melech. In Kabbalah we are taught that melech is an acronym for moach, which is brain, leiv, which is heart, kaved, which is liver, which Kabbalistically represents our behavior. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it is. Okay? Now, much as safe, just talk, we've mentioned this many times, but let's just put it into focus. Emotions are not always negative, even if they're negative emotions, right? Because it depends what they are. For example, if someone is stressed about a particular thing, provided it is channeled properly, it could be very helpful. You see, when we're going to talk about changing emotions, which we started today's talk about, we don't mean eradicating emotions. Because eradicating emotions is not a good thing to do. And the simple reason for that is because, as I explained before, the emotions are who we are. Right? And therefore, if we eradicate emotions, we become dead. We're lifeless people. We might be existing, but we're lifeless. Emotions are critically important. Because emotions are the person, that's why emotions are absolutely critical to the human being. It's about guiding the emotions. I need to be worried sometimes. You need to be worried, but otherwise you wouldn't be responsible. If we never stress, we'd never get things done. We live in a society today where people think everything that's difficult is stress. Right? Stress is not a bad word necessarily. It depends what it's done, depends when it happens. You do need to be a little bit, have a sense of urgency sometimes, right? Sometimes we need to channel emotions. So we're not talking about eradicating our emotions, we're talking about channeling, guiding, replacing sometimes, but putting it on track, because there are lots of very important emotions which we often call bad emotions, negative emotions, but they have their place and they need to be guided. But that also has to do with our belief system. And it also has to do with our control. It's about, our thoughts controlling our brain, controlling our heart, because it puts a stop, it puts the brakes on, it channels, it tells us when we could have those emotions and when not, and so on and so forth. So just to finish off, I was going to do something else, we'll do it next week, but just to finish two things. First of all, why do we have our beliefs? So the truth is, it's not really relevant, but it is relevant in a way. We have our beliefs from various different, we have our beliefs and we have a sort of a temperament for various reasons. It could have to do with circumstance, it could have to do with childhood experiences, it could have to do with trauma, and it could have to do with the way we were spoken to and treated and so on and so forth. The reason that's important to know, by the way, is not for ourselves. Because we should never use it as an excuse. Because the bottom line is that doesn't make a difference why our belief system comes, because we can always change it. And we can always challenge it. You know where it does make a difference? How we treat other people. And how we parent and how we treat other people in relationships, because we can sometimes have a profound influence on other people's belief systems, and other people's emotional personalities, construct, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, we do have causes. Sometimes what happens in early infancy and childhood experience can be amazing. Sometimes it's temperament. It's just God created us with weaknesses and He created us with egos. And as we've talked about before, we have the soul, we have a sense of goodness and meaning and purpose and purity, but we also have a competing force which is called our own ego, the default temperament of a human being to be self-centered. Every person expresses that in a different way, and part of what we put on this planet is to work on that. Is to work on not being self-centered, to work on being selfless rather than selfish, to understand the world doesn't revolve around us, and therefore when we walk in the street, no, not everyone has to look where they're going except for me, and therefore if they do, they're stupid. Maybe they're not. Maybe I should be more tolerant, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different causes why we have those belief systems, and why a personality is shaped and prone in a way which it is. But at the end of the day, what is so fundamental, particularly in Jewish thinking, which comes out a lot in more modern psychology, is that it actually makes no difference, because a person has a choice to make decisions, to challenge their belief systems, to dispute their thinking, and therefore have a profound impact, at least to make progress Not overnight, not instant transformation, but to make progress in becoming a better, more refined, and a better human being, which influences and aspires better behavior. So I'll just finish off just with one very quick thing, which I think many years ago we mentioned this, but it's a beautiful little model. I'll try to quickly. So just to go away with this, and then we're gonna develop it over the next few weeks. So it's the ABC model, right? So the ABC model means an activating event. So the person cut me off. That's the A. That's the activating event. B is the beliefs, and C is the consequences. And most people tend to think, before we give this a lot of thought, that C is an outcome of A. So something happened, and it had a consequence. And the problem is that we forget that B in the middle. That B in the middle is so important, right? Just it's an easy way to remember this. So the ABC, which means there's an activating event, but that doesn't define what the consequence is going to be. The best proof of that is because not everyone responds in the same way. Not everyone has who has the same event will have the same consequences. Why? Because there's a B in the middle, and the B is the change in the belief, and the belief is different. So therefore she says that the ABC model is the activating event, then comes beliefs, then comes the consequences, and therefore what they did was that Ellis introduced the D, and the D is to dispute. So you learn to dispute your beliefs, and when you learn to dispute your beliefs, then you have a chance of the C being different, the consequence being different than it is. The activating event will never change. Those things are always going to happen. The consequence doesn't depend on the activating event. The consequence depends on the belief. So if we dispute our belief, then we have a chance of trying to have a different consequence. How we do that, what are the strategies, what are the components of all of this, we'll keep developing it over the next few weeks. Have a wonderful week.